Shabbat Shalom, YouTube. Today is the holy day of the week. Today is the Sabbath. From Friday evening to Saturday evening, the Torah commands us that we do no work, and Christ affirmed the Torah. The holy day is not Sunday, like the Christians who separated themselves from the Torah believe, and the holy day is not Friday, like the Muslims believe. The holy day is Friday evening to Saturday evening. And in this, we are expected to do no work, to not cook, and, to not light a fire. There's few restrictions. Look into the Torah for details. That's not what this video is about. This video is mostly about Palestine, the Philistines, and the history of Islam with regards to Judaism, and how Christianity, being the offshoot of Judaism, the completed version of Judaism, what Islam is to us as well. Banu Qurayza were a Jewish tribe that lived in northern Arabia at the oasis of Yathrib, and they were slaughtered and enslaved by Muhammad. There were 3 tribes of Jews in Arabia. The first 2 were allowed to flee. The last tribe was not allowed to flee. They realized Muhammad was a false prophet. Muhammad also tried to convince the Jewish population of Medina that he was their prophet, but failed and was criticized in part for their inconsistencies of his Quran with the Jewish scriptures. So they looked at the Torah and they looked at what Islam was saying, and they were like, this is not the same religion. Disassociate yourselves with Muhammad. He's a false prophet. Well, he didn't like that. So he changed the direction of the Islamic prayer from Jerusalem to the Kaaba in Mecca, and sometime later he ordered the expulsion of the Banu Kainuka and Banu Nadir from Medina by him. But then he gets a vision from his schizophrenia demon, Jibril, and he was told to attack the Qurayza, despite their earlier assistance to him in excavating a trench for one of their wars. So they basically said, please let us leave with 1 camel load each. He said, no, unconditional surrender. He said, let us leave without taking anything. He said, no, unconditional surrender. After 25 days siege, he took them, and he put the men to death, and he took the women and children as slaves, and he sold them. That is what Islam is to Judaism. So let's question this. What is this religion then? If it's not Judaism, if it's not Christianity, but it resembles Judaism, it resembles Christianity. They're talking about Jesus, the son of Mary. They're talking about Moses and Solomon and David and all the prophets. What is this religion actually about? Well, Islam is Hubal worship. Allah and Hubal are the same being. I went into a video about this fairly recently. The pagan origins of Islam. But we're mostly going to be delving with Palestine, the Philistine land, and this historical war that's been waged against the Hebrews ever since the days of Moses by the Canaanites. The only way to win this war is to be extremely obedient to the Torah, extremely obedient to the Gospels. If you want to learn about the Torah, read the book of Deuteronomy. Read the last chapter of the book of Joshua. Deuteronomy especially is the book of the law. It is the most important book of the Old Testament. It could honestly be the most important book of the entire Bible, because everybody knows the story of Jesus. He was born of a virgin, he was crucified for our sins, he rose from the dead, he baptized, and he gave communion. That summarized, and he affirmed the Torah and the prophets. That essentially summarizes all of Christianity. He did miracles, but aside from a few you could do the entire story of Christianity, of the Gospels, within a couple minutes. But the Torah, the law of Moses, which Christ repeatedly affirmed to us, this takes time. This takes study. The Torah, Deuteronomy, God says through Moses, study it every single day. Meditate on it day and night. This is our defense against the witches, against Satan, against the pagans. And when we follow the Torah, explicitly follow it, everything goes well. But when we reject it, when we slack off, that's when the problems come. That's when the pagans take over society. It always happens in waves. It doesn't happen all at once. Every civilization, every generation gets worse. So the Banu Qurayza were essentially ethnically cleansed along with 2 other tribes, except this group was exterminated. The men were exterminated, and the women and children were sold into slavery because they did not see Muhammad as a prophet. This is the face of Islam. Let's get to the face of the Philistines, the Palestinians. First, I feel we should discuss Esau, also known as Edom, the kingdom of Idumea. Jacob and Esau were twins. They were the children of Isaac and his wife, I believe Rebekah. So Esau was the firstborn, but Jacob ended up inheriting the kingdom. Esau was a wicked man. He married Canaanite women, which were heretics to God. They were pagans, they were witches, Satanists, very wicked people, and their land was disinherited from them because of their witchcraft. So Canaanites, from Esau's lineage with the Canaanites, this is where we get the Amalekites and the Edomites and a few other sects, which have always been hostile to the Jews, even in the days of Moses. So the generations of Esau, firstborn, came out all red. They named him Esau. Jacob came out grabbing Esau's heel. Esau was a hunter of the field. Isaac loved Esau. Esau came and bought the pottage from Jacob, sold his birthright. And essentially what ends up happening is he takes Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, two Canaanites, which upset his parents. So Jacob and Esau have always had struggle. Esau has always been hostile to Jacob, and his lineage was always hostile to the lineage of the Jews. That's essentially what this is about. This Edomite clan has essentially created a false version of Judaism. And this is what the Talmud is about. The Talmud is an imitation of the Torah while being extremely hostile to everything that God taught. And all these heretics are working together, competing with one another, but working together towards the same agenda. And that agenda is to enslave humanity in the Antichrist system. So Esau, very, very wicked man, and his descendants far more wicked than he was. The Edomites, the Amalekites especially. The Amalekites were his grandchildren, his bastard grandchildren. That was Amalek, and these were especially hated by God. But we have to know where it came from. Esau, Jacob and Esau marries the Canaanites, and from the Canaanites we get his lineage of the Edomites and the Amalekites. We'll get to that right now. So this is Amalek. In Exodus 17, they had just left Egypt. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill. So Joshua did as Moses. Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. The Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. God will exterminate the Amalekites. This is in the Torah. So the Amalekites have been the most hostile entity in the Torah against the Jews. The Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, which would be in the land of Idumea, which is near Jordan. And the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea, by the coast of Jordan, and by the coast of Jordan. So when they're saying Canaanites here, I'm pretty sure they're talking about the Philistines, the Palestinians. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwelt in the valley. The Amalekites and Canaanites are there before you, and you shall fall by the sword because you've turned away from the Lord. Therefore the Lord will not be with you. So, remember what Amalek did unto you by the way when you were come out forth out of Egypt. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies round about in the land which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance to possess it, that you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, and you shall not forget it. So Amalek is a really big problem. And even in the days of the judges, after Moses, after Joshua, when the Jews come into their territory, which God promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in perpetuity, if they obeyed the Torah. We see that they're still causing problems. The Ammonites are the Jordanians. So the Ammonites and the Amalekites are going up against Israel. So this has been a problem for a very long time. In the days of the judges, Israel has basically been at war with all these different groups. Why? Because they did not obey God. In Judges chapter 2, the angel of the Lord, who is Christ, the Son of God, says, I made a covenant with your fathers. I swore that I would take you out of the land of Egypt and give you your own land, but you've not obeyed my voice. I told you to utterly destroy these Canaanites. Why have you made a covenant with them? Now, because you've not obeyed my voice, I will test you. I will no longer drive them out from before your face, and I will see what is inside of you. So essentially, because they did not obey God, they did not obey the angel of the Lord, who is Christ, who spoke for his Father, now we have all these different groups who survived, which is essentially the Philistines, who are the Canaanites. Midianites are the Arabians, the Amalekites, the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. Midianites and Amalekites and all the children of the east. So basically it's just war. In the book of Judges, it's just constant states of war until they finally get a monarchy. So we're going to get into the next segment. So Edom, Idumea. This is actually where the lineage of Herod comes from. All the King Herods in the Bible, they weren't actually Jews. They weren't Hebrews. They were Edomites pretending to be Jews. Essentially Jordanian converts who are ethnically related to Esau. Heretical fake Jews. So we see the lineage of Edom, Idumea from Esau. Esau is Edom, Edomites in Mount Seir, land of Edom. God does not like these people because they have always been hostile to the Hebrews and they have not kept the Torah. They have not obeyed the law of Moses, and they were always extremely hostile to the Jews, constantly at war with them, constantly trying to exterminate them, constantly losing. But God only defends us when we obey him. So we have to keep the Gospels and we have to keep the Torah. And that's it. Then God fights for us. And I mean, look what happened in the days of Joshua. Joshua cleansed all of the land of Canaan except for a few small pieces because of how obedient they were in those days. So we must obey. That's all there is to it. The dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab trembling shall take hold upon them. And all the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Exactly how they took that land. All the inhabitants of the land of Canaan were terrified watching all these miracles. But when the Jews disobey their God, the miracles disappear. So the land of Canaan, the people of Canaan, these are the descendants of Ham. So Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Japheth, and Shem. Japheth is the father of the Caucasian race. Ham is the father of the African races, North African and Sub-Saharan African. So the North Africans aren't really black. The Egyptians are not really black. They look more like Arabian. But Canaan was cursed because of what his father Ham did. Ham uncovered Noah's nakedness. When Noah woke up from his sleep, he cursed Canaan, the youngest son of Ham, and he called him a servant of servants. Well, Canaan, essentially the colony of Egypt, the land of Canaan is essentially a colony of the Egyptians, and they colonized the land that we call Palestine, the land we call Israel, the land we call Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call it. It's Israel, though. If you're going with what the Bible says, if you believe the Quran, which comes from the Bible, if you believe the Gospels, if you believe the Torah, it's Israel. So this is where Canaan comes from. And God promised it to the seed of Abraham because of the wickedness of the Canaanites. They were a wicked people. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. So we see here about the Canaanites. God has promised that they will. Abraham lives in the land of Canaan for a time, and God promises him the land of Canaan, and he fulfills this prophecy through Moses and through Joshua. I will drive out before you the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. When you come into the land of Canaan, which I give you for possession, I put the plague of leprosy. After the doings, the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do. And after the doings in the land of Canaan, where I bring you, you shall not do. What was wrong with the Canaanites? They were sacrificing their children to Moloch. They were engaging in cannibalism, according to the book, The Wisdom of Solomon. All kinds of disgusting, degenerate sins were common among the Canaanite people. And for that reason, God wanted them all cleansed from the land. But the Jews took slaves of the Canaanites, even though they were not supposed to. They were supposed to drive them out completely from the land. And because they kept some of them as slaves, their gods became a snare. You can read more about that in Judges chapter 2. The angel of the Lord speaks to the Jews, and he says, why did you not drive them out? I told you to do this, and now their gods will be a snare to you, and I will test you. I will no longer drive them out from before your face. So this is essentially what the war is about. Judaism, as the Torah teaches it, came from God. Everything that contradicts the Torah, which you can read Deuteronomy to know what the Torah is about. I think it's 34, 35 chapters. This is what God expects from us. This is what Christ affirmed for us. Everybody who rejects the Torah rejects God. Everybody who rejects the Torah disobeys Christ. And he is not your master if you will not make the attempt to understand and obey him. So here's one of the prophecies from Moses, Deuteronomy 30. It shall come to pass when all these things are come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which I set before you. So what he's talking about, what God's talking about is the Torah. I set before you a blessing and a curse. blessing if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and a curse if you do not keep them and go after other gods. But all these things are come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you shall call them to mind among all the nations where God will have driven you. And you shall return unto the Lord your God, and shall obey his voice according to all that I command you this day, you and your children, with all your heart, with all your soul. Then the Lord your God will turn your captivity and have compassion upon you, and will gather you from among all the nations where God has scattered you. And if any of yours be driven unto the outmost parts of heaven, from there will God fetch you, and from there will he fetch you, gather you and fetch you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will do you good and multiply you above your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. And the Lord your God will put all these curses upon your enemies, and on those that hate you, which persecuted you. And you shall return and obey the voice of the Lord, and do all his commandments which I command you this day. And the Lord your God will make you plenteous in every work of your hand, in the fruit of your body, meaning your children, and the fruit of your cattle, and in the fruit of your land for good. And the Lord your God will rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your fathers. If you shall hearken unto the voice of the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in this book of the law, and if you will turn unto the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. So you can read all about that in the book of Deuteronomy. So this is essentially the story of the Jews for 3,500 years. They've been at war with these people, these Canaanites, these Edomites, these Philistines, these Amalekites. And it all comes down to, are they going to obey God and be protected, or are they going to be seduced into witchcraft and become a tributary for other peoples? Because right now Israel is not really Israel. Israel is not really a theocracy. Israel is controlled by a bunch of heretical Talmudist Satanists like the Rothschilds. And all that has to change. And it can change very quickly. All they have to do is say, you know what, this isn't working for us. Let's go back to the law of Moses like our ancestors followed. Let's make it the law of the land, and everything will go well for them. That's all God expects. If you shall return and obey the voice of the Lord and do all his commandments, then everything will go well. So let's jump into modern history. Let's jump into the Zionist Congress, which essentially is run by heretics. They knew that they were going to get the Holy Land back. And instead of it being a true Holy Land where they follow the Torah, it was a political puppet of international Jewish bankers like the Rothschilds. So 1897, the first Zionist Congress is held, and the World Zionist Organization is founded. Jewish Colonization Association makes its first purchase in the north of Palestine, Philistines, the land of the Philistines, and the acquisition of 31,500 dunams of land near Tiberias. And this will be one of the largest land purchases for the purpose of colonization within Palestine. Well, is it really colonization if it's land that you're buying? It doesn't sound like colonization. It sounds like real estate. So the founding of the Bar Giora, an underground Zionist militia in Jaffa. First edition of Al Carmel, an anti-Zionist newspaper, is published in Haifa. 1908, we're already seeing the Arabs don't want Jews to immigrate to Palestine. Why? Because these are the Philistines. These are historical enemies of the Hebrews. And we're going to get to the Philistines shortly. What do they call? What is the Arabic word for Palestine? Philistine. Philistine. It's the exact same people. Literally the exact same people, going back to the Judges, but we'll get to that shortly. 1909, founding of Hashomer Zionist Defense Militia and precursor to the Haganah. 1910, the Fula Affair. Elias Sorsak sold 10,000 dunams around the village of Al-Fula. The Palestinian peasants inhabiting the land petitioned the Ottoman government for assistance, but they were unsuccessful and expelled by the Hashomer paramilitary group. This is one of the first expulsions of the Palestinians. Well, if the land was sold, then, that's capitalism. 1911, Muslim intellectuals and politicians from around the Levant formed Al-Fatah, the Young Arab Society, a small Arab nationalist club in Paris. They also requested that Arab conscripts in the Ottoman army not be required to serve in non-Arab regions except in time of war, but they went underground and demanded that complete independence and unity of the Arab provinces. The new Young Turk authorities allowed Zionist groups to purchase land in Ottoman Syria. And then the first edition of the Arabic language newspaper, Philistines, published in Jaffa. So this was essentially a anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish propaganda newspaper, which was against Jews. This is before World War II. Okay, this is before World War I. They're already hostile to the Jews coming back to their ancestral lands before World War I had even begun. Why? Because these are the Philistines. They don't want the Jews there. They and the Jews have been fighting wars since like 1300 before Christ. Moshe Barsky falls victim to Arab Bedouin raiders, becoming the first kibbutz movement member to be killed by Arab violence. So it's a kibbutz, it's a commune. They live together, they grow food, they share everything. And the Arabs said, we don't want you here, let's kill them. 1950. So the Arabs drew first blood. Let's keep that in mind. The Philistines drew first blood. 1915. First letter from the British government and the governor of Mecca. The exchange became known as the McMahon-Hussein Correspondence. It promises an Arab state in the Middle East in return for revolt against the Turks. That Palestine was part of the deal was confirmed during a 1918 war cabinet meeting, but later denied by the British government. So we see, So we see 1916, beginning of the Arab revolt against the Young Turk regime in Constantinople, the Balfour Declaration, which is between essentially the Zionist Rothschilds and Lord Balfour of England. And, Israel should be a Torah theocracy. Israel should be studying the book of Deuteronomy and the prophets and all that stuff. That's what they should be. Right now, it's essentially a secular country with gay rights and witchcraft and all kinds of horrible stuff, graven images of idols and stuff, and all that's wrong. All that violates what Moses received from God. And because they will not obey the Torah, they're cursed. So here we see the wheels turning for the state of Israel to be born, but not a true state of Israel, not the kingdom of Israel, but a secular, Talmudic, Canaanite impersonation of Israel. I should have saved something on the Canaanite movement in Israel. That would have been something good, because the spies are everywhere. The Canaanites are still in Israel. I need to remember this. So the Canaanite movement predates the modern state of Israel, and essentially it's like an elitist, intellectual, pseudo-intellectual movement where they glorify a bunch of stuff that was considered wicked by the Torah, and they rewrite the history of the Torah. And essentially these are like the secular Jews who undermine their own Bible. So these are Canaanites. These are not really Jews. These are like the Edomites, the Amalekites, the Canaanites. That's what they call themselves. They call themselves Canaanites. So let's call them what they are. They're Canaanites. They're the people that God commanded Moses to exterminate. Otherwise, they would become a danger to the Jews from then on. So Rothschild Rothschild makes an agreement with the British Prime Minister that there will be an Israeli state instead of Palestine. Following an offensive lasting 3 weeks, an officer in the British Army accepts the surrender of Jerusalem from the town's mayor, Hussein al-Husseini. Zionist commission arrives in mandatory Palestine. First Muslim-Christian association established in Jaffa. Well, Muslims and Christians can't really be friends, because once you delve into what the Bible says and what the Quran says, they don't see us. It says in the Quran, do not take Christians or Jews as allies. They are allies with one another. The Quran also says that when Jesus comes, first of all, the Quran says Jesus was not crucified, that was a deception, that God made it look like Jesus was crucified, but sent a doppelganger to be crucified instead, and that Jesus went up to heaven. And when Jesus comes back, he's going to break the crosses. They say Jesus is going to make Christianity illegal. And he's going to say, I'm a Muslim, and he's going to basically be an asset of the Mahdi, who seems like the Antichrist. So keep that in mind, what Islam says about Christ, that he's not God, that he wasn't crucified, that he didn't die, and that when he comes back, he's going to make Christianity and the cross illegal. That is what they believe. So no Muslim-Christian association. You know what? Christian-Jewish association. Let's talk to the Jews. Let's read the Torah to them. Let's read their prophets to them. Let's help them to understand that Christ is the Messiah of their own prophecies. And let the Jews read the Torah to us. A lot of Christians don't accept the Torah. That's a problem. The Jews don't accept the Gospels, and the Christians don't accept the Torah. And that is where the schism lies. So we see just a bunch of problems coming from this. I mean, it's always going to be like this. They're never going to live peacefully with the Jews because they're the Philistines. But here we can see where it starts. February 27th, 1,000 protesters take part in an Arab nationalist demonstration in Jerusalem carrying banners bearing this. This is before World War II. Stop Zionist immigration, our country for us. So they don't want Jews to immigrate into the Holy Land, where their ancestors came from, where God promised them the Holy Land if they obeyed the Torah. That's insane. So we see that this is all it's ever been. 1920 Palestine riots, violent 4-day riot against the Jews in Jerusalem's Old City. Al-Husseini was charged with inciting the Arab crowds with an inflammatory speech and sentenced by military court held in camera, private, to 10 years imprisonment in absentia So essentially, this is all it's been. They don't want the Jews there. They've been hostile to Israel since before Israel was a thing. And they were hostile to Israel back in the days of Joshua and the Judges. So you can read about this. It's the timeline of intercommunal conflict in mandatory Palestine. I mean, it goes on for a while. It's always been like this. It's always going to be like this. And the best thing the Jews can do is follow the Torah, read the prophets, and come to terms with what the Gospels say. And that's what everybody should be doing. Read the Torah, read the prophets. Once you have an understanding of Judaism, then you can read the Gospels, and then you can understand what Christ was talking about. So now we're going to talk about Philistine, the two different types of Palestinian propaganda newspapers, basically named Philistine. So the Philistines, very important in the Old Testament. The Muslims either know the truth about the Old Testament enemies of Israel, or they don't know. But if they do know, they're playing dumb, because it seems like they think the Canaanites were Jews, and they think that the Canaanites were the ones who were given the land. Like, everything that the Muslims say about the Bible is completely corrupted. So that's what tells me that their religion is a corruption of the Bible by the Antichrist system. So Philistine is a Palestinian Arabic language daily newspaper founded in Gaza in 2006. And it is the largest daily newspaper in the Gaza Strip by circulation. Philistines. So let's get to another one of these. So there was another one that was much older. This is the more modern one. All right, so this is Philistine. Philistine, Arabic for Palestine, Philistine, was an Arabic language newspaper from 1911 in Jaffa. Philistine began as a weekly publication, evolving into one of the most influential dailies in Ottoman and Mandatory Palestine. And essentially it was an anti-Zionism, which there was no real Zionism at this point. There was no Israel. So it's anti-Jewish immigration. That's what it was. Anti-Zionism, Palestinian nationalism. So essentially this is Hamas before Hamas. Although they claim that it was founded by Christians, but these Palestinian Christians, are they really Christians? If they don't follow the Torah, are they really Christians? Is anybody a Christian if they don't follow the Torah? Christ told us to follow the Torah. What percentage of Christians actually do that? Very few. So, allegedly by Arab Christians, opponents of Zionism in the British administration, the country's fiercest and most consistent critic of Zionism, denouncing it as a threat to Palestine's Arab population. The newspaper, which addressed its readers as Palestinian since its inception. So this is where the idea of Palestinian national identity comes from. It comes from rejecting Jewish immigration. Its circulation was estimated to be 3,000, but it had some problems. Like, they incited violence. They incited all kinds of problems. Jaffa, I believe that was one of the lands in the Torah, or Judges, or Joshua, where the Philistines were from. Let me see about the controversies. Initial aim to promote Arab Orthodox movement. I don't like orthodoxy. I see a lot of paganism hiding behind orthodoxy, the Mary veneration, they call it. Opposition to Zionism. So does it have a date here? The date is 1923. So they're already saying we don't want Jews to come here. 1923. Palestine went from publishing only a few articles on Zionism every month in its first year to soon publishing an article or more per issue on the subject. And the paper ultimately came to be relied upon by newspapers throughout the region for news of Zionist colonization in Palestine. The newspaper addressed its readers as Palestinians since its inception in the 1911 during the Ottoman period. And it was suspended for inciting violence. Suspended once for criticism of Mutasarrif, and once for what British authorities summarized as a fulminating and vague threat that when the eyes of the nation were open to the peril towards which it was drifting, it would rise like a roaring flood and consuming fire, and there would be trouble in store for the Zionists, for the Jews. Following the first suspension in 1914, Palestine issued a circular responding to the government charges that they were sowing discord between the elements of the Ottoman Empire, which stated that Zionist was not the same as Jew. They've been saying this since 1914. So yeah, if you're a religious Jew, if you follow the Torah, you're a proper Jew. If you don't follow the Torah and you call yourself a Jew, then no, you're not. You're a Canaanite. So they claim that Zionist is not the same as Jew and describe the form as a political party whose aim is to restore Palestine to their nation and concentrate them in it and to keep it exclusively for them. The newspaper was supported by Muslim and Christian notables, and the judge annulled the suspension on grounds of free speech. So they're inciting violence, coverage of sport events, newspaper influence, Palestine sentence. All right, so that'll be it for this segment. So who are the Philistines? The Philistines were a people who once occupied the southwestern part of Canaan. The residents of Palestine, sometimes referred to as Philistines by British writers of the 18th and early 19th century. So that's what they were called, Philistines, in the 18th and 19th century. This must be understood. The Palestinians take their entire national identity from the enemies of the Hebrews before King David, from the Philistines. So, Philistia, a confederation of 5 main cities or a pentopolis in the southwest Levant made up principally of Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, and for a time Jaffa, which is where the newspaper was from. So you can read about this in the book of Judges. They were a very strong enemy of the Hebrews, and basically this was the one group that was not cleansed from the land because the Jews were not obeying the angel of the Lord. They were not obeying the Son of God. And so God said, now I will test you. If you will not obey my voice, I will leave before you an enemy. And this enemy is going to test you, and their gods will be a threat to you. So here is the land of the Philistines. As you can see, that's the Gaza Strip. And this is Idumea. Edom and Moab is Idumea. It's Jordan. So, Philistine, Canaanite, Aramaic languages. The religion was the Canaanite religion, which is paganism. It's Dagon worship. Dagon is essentially the same god as Zeus, Baal, Hubal, who we know to be the same as Allah. So, scholars believe the Philistines were made up of people of Asian background and that they were a mixed population with the local Canaanites, also known to be called the Peleset or the Philistines. History. So let's get into the biblical aspect of this. But now we see who these people were before King David, before King Saul even. In the days of the judges, they were a strong enemy of the Hebrews. Very powerful enemy. And the only way to beat them is strict obedience to the Torah, strict obedience to the Gospels. And then God will deliver victory into our hands. That's all it is. Obedience to God is how we win the battle against Satan and his minions. So the timeline for the name Palestine. So like I said, it goes back to the Philistines. Peleset. The term Peleset is found in 5 inscriptions referring to the neighboring people who are generally identified with the Philistines or their land Philistia, starting from around 1150 BC during the 12th dynasty of Egypt. And these people have been an enemy for the Hebrews ever since the days of the Judges, which I think is around 1300, 1400 BC. Syria, Palestina. So the Romans named it Palestine after they expelled the Jews. So they knew that these were the Philistines, and they gave them their own country back. Let's keep that in mind, that Edom, Idumea, King Herod and his family, they were friends of Julius Caesar. Okay? Caesar is the Romans, correct? Sometimes I get it mixed up with the Greeks, but it's essentially the same religion, Greco-Romanism. But I'm very certain that Caesar is Roman. Well, the Caesars were friends with the Herods. So the Edomites, the fake Jews of Edom, of Esau, they were put into power by the Romans in Israel. So that's how this war works. All the pagans know the power of Yahweh. The most powerful pagans know the truth of the Bible. And their only method of control is to get us to disobey the Bible. That's it. If we follow the Torah, if we follow the Gospels, they have no power. So they have to install puppets who will take us away from the Torah, take us away from the Gospels. So Palestine, Philistine, it's the exact same thing. And the idea of the Palestinian nation state, it started with the Roman expulsion of the Jews from Israel, which is a result of the Jews disobeying the Torah, disobeying the prophets, and crucifying Christ. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. You don't kill the Son of God and get away with it. So what does the Bible say about Gaza? Judges 16. Actually, let's start with Joshua. So the prophet Joshua is smiting them from Kadesh Barnea even unto Gaza. Joshua 11. None of the Anakims, who were a race of giants, were left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. These are the lands of the Philistines. In fact, now that I think about it, David and Goliath. Goliath was supposed to be a Philistine giant. So this is essentially part of the Palestinian ethnic makeup, even if it's not very much because the Palestinians are diluted with other races now. They're mongrels, essentially. So Joshua 13:3. The Canaanite, 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazathites, and the Ashdothites, the Eshkelonites, the Gittites, and the Ekronites, and the Avites. These are the 5 lords of the Philistines. So the Philistines have been a problem. Judah took Gaza and the coast. They encamped against them, destroyed the increase of the earth till you come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass. Samson went to Gaza, saw a harlot, and went unto her. So the story of Samson and Delilah, it's very important for seeing this conflict between Jews and the Palestinians in great detail. They essentially take Samson and they throw him into the temple of their god Dagon. They pluck out his eyes, and then Samson crashes down the 2 pillars and brings down the entire house and kills thousands of Philistines, who are essentially the same as the Palestinians. He smote the Philistines even unto Gaza and the borders thereof. Let's see. So we're going to get to the prophets now. Baldness has come upon Gaza, Jeremiah 47:5. Baldness upon Gaza. Ashkelon is cut off with the remnant of their valley. How long will you cut yourself? Amos 1:6. For 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment, because they carried away captive the whole captivity to deliver them to Edom. So because the Philistines took away the Jews and sold them over to the Edomites, God is going to severely punish them. I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, which shall devour the palaces thereof. Zephaniah 2:4. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron will be rooted up. So God is threatening war against the Philistines, who we know to be the Palestinians. Zechariah 9:5. Ashkelon shall see it and fear. Gaza also shall see it and be very sorrowful. And Ekron for her expectation shall be ashamed. And the king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. And in Zechariah 14 it says, there will no longer be any Canaanites in the house of the Lord. So this is talking about Armageddon. When Armageddon comes, when Christ comes back down with his sword, he's going to cleanse Israel of all the enemies, all the Canaanites pretending to be Jews, all the Hamas, everything that is a threat to his holy people is going to be cleansed from the Holy Land. And everyone's going to be forced to worship Christ. And it's going to be beautiful. This is the Messianic kingdom. And they don't want to worship Christ, but they're going to have to. The survivors of Armageddon will be forced to worship Christ, or they will have droughts and famines and plagues. And that's the way the world's going to run. For 1,000 years, Christ will be undisputed power over all the earth, and whether they want to or not, they will be forced to worship him. And after the 1,000 years, then we get the new heaven and the new earth. So when the Muslims say that the word Palestine is in the Bible, they're true, they're correct, but it's not a good thing. Exodus 15:14. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. This is the land of the Philistines. In other translations, it says Philistines. Isaiah 14:29. Rejoice not, O Palestine, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote you is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. So God is threatening the Philistines. Isaiah 14:31. Howl, O gate, cry, O city, you whole Palestina are dissolved. For there shall come from the north a smoke, and none shall be alone in his appointed times. Joel 3:4. Yea, and what shall you do with me, O Tyre, which is Lebanon, and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Will you render me a recompense? And if you recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. So God is saying, if whatever you try to do to me and my people, I will quickly return it unto you. So yes, Palestine is in the Bible. It's the land of the Philistines, and they're a historical enemy of the Hebrews. And this will be the final segment we go into. So Abimelech makes a peace treaty with Abraham, but his people are not very honorable. And essentially, the Hebrews are being treated poorly, even in the days of Abraham, by the Philistines, by the Palestinians. But let's fast forward. You can read about this on your own. You just type Philistines into Bible Gateway. Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the land of the Philistines, although this was near, for God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war and return to Egypt. I will set your bounds from the Red Sea even unto the sea of the Philistines, and from the desert unto the river. I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out from before you. Joshua 13, this is the land that yet remains, all the borders of the Philistines and all Geshuri. So, Philistines, Palestinians, exact same people. 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazathites, the Ashdod, I already read this one. 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonians, and the Hivites that dwell in Mount Lebanon. Baal Hermon, so Lord Hermon. unto the entering in at Hamath. So essentially, they have become a mongrelized race. But you can read all about their wars with the Hebrews in the book of Judges, Joshua, Samuel, 1 and 2, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They've been an enemy of the Hebrews ever since the days of Moses. The land is rightfully the Jews if they obey the Torah, if they obey the Gospels. And essentially, anybody who follows the Torah and the Gospels is grafted into the kingdom of Israel. The issue is that they do not want to follow the Bible. Islam teaches a counterfeit version of the Bible. This counterfeit is that the land of Israel isn't a real thing, that the land was never promised to the Jews, that the children of Israel are an ethnicity and not a geographical region, that the land belongs to the Canaanites, that the Jews have been disinherited by God permanently, and that the Bible's corrupt. They think that the Torah is corrupt, the prophets are corrupt, the Gospels are corrupt. Everything in the Bible they say is corrupt. But Muhammad is right. Well, everything Muhammad said is heresy to the Bible. So who's telling the truth and who's telling lies? Is Moses wrong? Is Abraham wrong? Are all the prophets wrong? Are the Gospels wrong? Because that's like 2,000 years of being wrong. Or is Muhammad wrong? 2,000 years of archaeology, history, genealogy, all these wonderful things you can find in the Bible if you take it literally. Or Muhammad, who claims it was all corrupted and that he is the final prophet, without prophecies, without miracles, rejected by the Jews as a false prophet. They rejected him as a false prophet, and then he became more heretical and more hostile to the Jewish religion, to the Jewish people. So essentially, this is the history of Palestine, the Philistines, Islam. It is a Canaanite religion pretending to be Judaism, and it is one of many Canaanite religions pretending to be something else. You see this in Catholicism with the worship of the Virgin Mary. You see this in Judaism with Kabbalah and the Talmud. Deuteronomy is very clear. What God expects from us is super crystal clear. Just read Deuteronomy every single day, meditate on it, and now you will understand what God expects you to do in the law of Moses. And Deuteronomy tells you what to expect from a true prophet. A prophet will tell you the truth, and he will be consistent with the Torah, and that's how you know he's a true prophet. So all these prophets came after Moses. You could consider Joshua a prophet. You could consider Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. All these prophets came after Moses, and they all told the same story, and they all followed the law of Moses. They all gave burnt sacrifices. They all did what Moses did. They all did what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did. And these prophets pointed to Jesus. All of them pointed to the Messiah, who would be born of a virgin. He would die for our sins. He would be God in the flesh. I mean, all these things were foretold hundreds of years before Christ. And then all of this was denied by the religion of Islam, by the Quran. So what is Islam if not a Canaanite heresy to the Bible? What is their Kaaba if not a pagan shrine of the black stone, which has Hubal pagan origins? Hubal, meaning the spirit of Baal, is the god of the Canaanites. Baal, Zeus, Dagon, Allah, it's all the same God. And this God is hostile to Judaism. This God is hostile to Christianity, which is essentially the same religion as Judaism if you take the Bible literally. Judaism without Christianity, as the Old Testament shows, is incomplete. Christianity without the Old Testament is also incomplete. Christ was not a Catholic. He was not Orthodox. He was not Protestant. He was not Muslim. He was a Torah-observant Jew, and he was the Son of God, as the prophets foretold. And he didn't hide that he was God. He told certain people. In John chapter 9, verse 35, I believe it was, he heals a blind man. He walks up to the blind man and he says, "Do you want to know who the Son of God is?" And he says, "Tell me so I can worship him." And he says, "You have seen him, and it is me who is speaking before you." And the blind man falls on his face and worships Christ. Christ is God. He's the Son of God. He's the angel of the Lord. He's the Lord of hosts. He is the Messiah, the King that all will worship according to the Old Testament prophets. The Jewish Bible is perfect. The New Testament, aside from the writings of Paul, wonderful. The Gospels are perfect. Revelation's perfect. But the writings of Paul, they go against the Torah. They leave a lot of leaven of the Pharisees. It ruins a lot of stuff. But aside from Paul, who lines up pretty closely with what Muhammad was about, oh no, there's a new covenant, and I am the new covenant. So, just, you want to be saved? Read Deuteronomy, read it again, read it again, read it again, read it again, do all that stuff. Teach Deuteronomy to others. That's one of the commandments. Teach the Torah. And once you have a good grasp on what Judaism is supposed to be, you have a good grasp on what the prophets said, then you can understand the Gospels. Then you can understand why Jesus was who he said he was. Because if you can't understand the Old Testament, you can't understand the Gospels. And then the Muslims can convince you that, no, Jesus was a prophet of Allah. He was a Muslim. He didn't die on the cross. He's going to come back, and he's going to work with the Mahdi. Well, who is the Mahdi if not an antichrist figure who denies the Bible? Food for thought. So, stand with Israel, but demand that Israel returns to the Torah. Demand that Israel returns to their prophets, that they understand the Torah and the prophets, and then the Gospels is like the final piece of the puzzle. And they will come to the Gospels eventually, but they must observe the Torah. The government of Israel must keep the Torah from top to bottom. It should be the law of the land. Deuteronomy should be blasted from every street corner in Arabic, Hebrew, and English for all to observe. Everybody should be learning the Torah. Everybody should be learning the Old Testament prophets. And then it'll be easier to tell who is evil and who is confused and who is good. Because right now everyone's confused. Satan's done a very good job of hiding the Bible from us, convincing us it was superstition and giving us false versions of the Bible like the Book of Mormon, the Jehovah's Witness Bible, and especially the Quran. But God's still there waiting for us, being merciful, being patient. We can always turn back to God whenever we want to. Do we want to? Shabbat Shalom. God bless.